and welcome back to Indie Venture Extra, our bonus series where we interview key members of the games industry. My guest today is the reviews editor at Rock Paper Shotgun and one of the best writers working in games media today. Since joining the industry in 2017, my guest has gone on to become a reviews powerhouse, offering nuanced and considered takes about the biggest PC games of the last few years. Welcome to the podcast, my long-suffering friend, Ed Thorn.
That was like the biggest ego boost I've ever received, and I thank you for that.
Good. I've got to look out for the boy.
The end part was was the gloom that I needed, I think, to bring me back down to earth. But no, it's great. It feels good to be back behind the mic with yourself. It feels like it's been a long time coming.
It does. So I'm very excited to have you on the podcast for two reasons, Ed. The first is that I think your position as reviews editor at Rock Paper Shotgun gives us a unique opportunity to discuss the difficulties around balancing AAA and indie coverage at a major outlet. And the second is that, yes, as you say, we used to work together, and I have missed recording with you so much since I left the site in 2023. So yeah, how does it feel to be back on Discord, chatting shit into a microphone together? It has been over a year since we last did anything like this together.
It is really odd, although it's odd, but in a weird way, it doesn't feel like a huge amount of time has passed.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of just like we're old buddies getting back together. The old men have regrouped to the Zimmer frames to sigh. Except this time we're not talking about like Saints Row and Redfall and all these other games that we spent a lot of time with and we sort of didn't really like. Aside from Sonic Frontiers, of course, we loved Sonic Frontiers.
Oh, yeah, of course. The best game of whatever year that came out, 2022, maybe?
I genuinely
I don't
can't
know.
remember.
Yeah, it's odd. I don't think we ever talked about a game that we truly loved throughout the entire time we were at RPS together.
Yeah.
Maybe Elden
right.
Ring, which was the first video we ever did. But yeah, most of the videos we did were about 6 out of 10 AA games that we just sort of had to play for 5 hours. And then we'd talk about it, get a bit glum, and then be like, all right, see you next week to talk about Gotham Knights or whatever.
Yeah, that's our 15 minutes video done. They were always a joy in a sort of weird way.
Yeah, I look back at them very fondly. And when I listen back, I do think we sort of, maybe quantified isn't the right word, but I sort of feel like for a brief period of time there, we sort of put our arms around this very odd pocket in AAA gaming between 2022 and 2023, where just fuck all was coming out. And we were like, well, this is what AAA games are right now. We get so excited about Saints Row, and then we'd play Saints Row, and that was just the roller coaster ride we're on for nearly 2 years. But no, it'd be nice to chat today about some indie games, about your time at Rock Paper Shotgun, and on the subject of indie games. Well, this episode's going out in the new year. You are kicking off year 3 of Indie Venture, Ed. I can think of no one better to launch this year with. But we are actually recording this at the start of December, so it does feel apt to ask you, are there any indie games that have impressed you in 2024, and do you have any favourites?
Impressed me? Ooh. I think the best indie game that I've played this year, that sounded a bit like the intros that we used to do.
It did, didn't it? I was just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, just sleeper agent activated there. The best indie game, in my opinion, that I've played is Threshold by Julian Avail. I'm probably butchering that, and I apologise. But no, it's a sort of atmospheric psychological horror. I've played a lot of them this year. I think I went on like a triple threat between Threshold, Mouthwashing, and Sorry We're Closed, basically one after the other, all of which are actually very good. But Threshold kind of just captured something in the rhythm of it. I should probably describe what it is. It's essentially you are kind of a government mandated worker and you begin in a little locker room, and it's kind of PSX style graphics, all kind of like blocky and pixelated, and a speaker kind of tells you to basically, I'm going to try and keep this vague because I don't want to spoil anything. It's very like, it's a narrative, it's like a story game, and it's very short actually, which is also a big bonus in this day and age. But yeah, you start in this locker room, tells you to get to work, and you're you step into this elevator and it sort of takes you higher and higher and higher, and you don't really know what's going on, but you sort of notice that there's this oxygen meter in the elevator, and it's sort of getting lower and lower and lower as you're climbing higher and higher and higher, and you step out onto this sort of foggy, grey, sort of slightly bleak wooden sort of floorboards on this like lonely mountain, and you meet this guy, this shift worker that you're taking over from. His shift has ended, you're to take over from him. He's called Mo. And so one of the most surprising things, one of the most novel things I've seen, is that he doesn't speak to you, but he brings out like a pencil and some paper and actually starts writing what he's going to say to you. Well, he doesn't say it, but he starts writing. And that's because oxygen is incredibly thin. There isn't much of it, and it's the most efficient way to chat to you.
Oh, wow.
And things happen, and essentially he shows you around this border post, and your job is to there's this train that kind of rumbles through this border post at intervals, and there's these lights, a sequence of lights that kind of go from green to red. And green means that the train is being kept at a certain pace, and that's the expected pace. He tells you that's what the government kind of expects it to be at.
Right.
And that's good. And you need to keep it at that expected pace. If it falls into this red light, that means it's not going as fast as it needs to be. So whenever that happens, you need to blow into this like whistle that he gives you. And you stand next to this big sort of mic and this big sort of speaker that kind of sort of flows out of it, and you need to blow into the whistle, and that kind of makes the train go faster. And as the train goes faster and meets that expected pace, there's like a stream, or like I suppose a small river, a stream. I don't know the technical term, I'm not a geography teacher. And that sort of rush, the flow of water becomes stronger, and that's good. He doesn't explain why, but it's just these things are good, and that's essentially your job. But each time that you blow into this whistle, it's robbing you of oxygen, which is precious, and your lungs start to burst, and you can the screen starts to crackle, and your guy sort of makes horrible heaving noises and wheezing noises, and Mo hands you this sort of strange little I don't know how to describe it, like a cylinder. I don't know, like a small cylinder type thing, and it's got like these teeth marks on it, and you're meant to chew on it to get oxygen, but it shatters in your mouth because it's basically made of glass.
What?
And yeah, so I'm not going to say too much more because it's just to say too much will spoil things, but Mo kind of takes you around this border post, and you kind of need to balance your oxygen levels with keeping this train at the correct pace, and you can sort of redeem tickets as like a ticket machine, and you can kind of redeem that at this machine that spits out these oxygen capsules, and you kind of need to balance grabbing these capsules with keeping the train running, but also because Mo's not there, you can actually start to explore the border post a bit and start rooting around and sort of like, try and figure out, well, what is that strange mound of earth that is next to the ticket machine? What is the building that he hasn't told you about that sits directly next to this vending machine that spits out oxygen capsules? What is in the train? Why is the stream running? What collects at the end of the stream? This sort of thing. And the more you uncover, the more the mystery develops. And I just thought it was absolutely brilliant because there's no music. That's a weird thing to say, but you're sort of totally absorbed in your job, and you're absorbed because you're forever listening to the rumble of the train and the siren that wails when the train isn't running at the expected pace, and the sound of the ticket machine, the sound of you crunching on the oxygen capsules. It's like you just get so absorbed in the machinations of what you're doing that you kind of forget that you're just playing this video game and you're meant to explore. I don't know, it's amazing. I thought it was brilliant.
It sounds very oppressive and a very atmospheric piece, which is interesting because I guess there's some similarities to mouthwashing there, that we're entering an age. I think we spoke about this on an episode that you won't have heard yet, actually, Ed, but we spoke about PS1 style horror games in 2024 particularly, and how they're moving away from oh, well, this is like a Silent Hill like, or this is like a Resident Evil like, and they're using the visual language of those games, but with entirely new and fresh, narrative conceits or fresh mechanics. And this sounds like of a piece with mouthwashing in that sense. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I think like mouthwashing sort of touches on like corporate things, corporate greed and all this sorts of stuff. And Threshold very much is like a commentary on that too, on sort of your work being this kind of ridiculous thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
You are blowing into a whistle to make a train move faster, and you're totally absorbed in that, and it seems really silly. It's almost as if like the government is sort of taking the mick out of you, but it's also deadly serious and your life is at stake. And I thought it was kind of commentary on your work kind of being disposable, but also kind of the importance of work, to have a purpose in life is important, but also curiosity sort of being rewarded and sort of bringing down a system perhaps. Yeah, it definitely has a message that once the game kind of ends, it can be quite abrupt, but it's quite overt, I think.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And I other than your review at RPS, I don't really feel like I've heard much about this. So it's very nice for you to come on and give it its flowers. Outside of the indies you've played this year, I'm laughing because I know the kind of things you've played this year because we catch up quite regularly. How has your year been in terms of gaming? How have you felt 2024 has been for games? And I'm saying this knowing full well that you've just reviewed Infinity Nikki. You were covering Skull and Bones at the start of the year, but it's rare because your main job is to review a lot of AAA games, which the three of us don't normally get to do that. So yeah, how's 2024 been for Ed in terms of games?
It's been a difficult year, Liam. It's been a difficult year. I mean, you mentioned Skull and Bones there. I'd erased that from my memory. I'd forgotten that was this year. That felt so long ago. To be honest with you, this year has been, to me, quite forgettable. Infinity Nikki, Skull and Bones. The only thing that other sort of AAA sort of game that I've really remember is the new Like a Dragon or Yakuza game, but that's just because I love those games. And it is a good one. But for the life of me, I can't really recall anything other than like maybe Threshold and Mouthwashing and that have really stuck with me and that really have felt like, God, this is a cultural event, or this really deserves attention. Most things have been a bit like, oh, that's a bit disappointing, or that was fine. I don't know if I'm doing a good job really describing it, but perhaps that's it. That's maybe I'm just summing it all up. My year has just been difficult to describe. Like I think our editor Graham was like, hey, we need to do our RPS. What are the top games we've played this year? Send me a list. And I was like, I can't come up with 10. What are my top 10? I came up with like 5 or 6 or something. And I was really sort of scratching at the bottom of a bucket. I don't even know if that's a term. But I was really trying to dig deep, try and find some stuff. Helldivers 2, which I gave a best is best, and I sort of stand by that. I think it was really good and certainly felt like a bit of a cultural event. But in a way, I've stopped playing it. I don't have any desire to play that anymore.
It was a moment though, right? Like I feel like Helldivers 2 was a bestest best in that point in time. I can't imagine getting into it now when it has, I mean, I assume it's expanded and changed loads over the last however many months, but it sort of feels like a bit like, well, a game that we both love, like Destiny 2 or Destiny. Like you sort of had to be there at the apex of it to fully understand it. If you picked it up today, you'd be a bit like, what is happening? I realise that I'm describing a video that we once did without fully realising it. You can go watch that. It's called Infantry Space and we're both very proud of it. But yeah, I don't know. It sort of feels like, to be honest, I'd forgotten about Helldivers 2.
To be honest with you, Threshold is probably the one that really sticks out in my mind. It's like a short, like concise experience that kind of just did what it needed to do. And I was totally hooked on it. I could just couldn't stop thinking about it. And weirdly, the Shin-Chan game that I won't bore everyone with for hours, but that was, and perhaps this is kind of the year that it's been, and that it's not a perfect game. It's not a 10 out of 10 or a 5 out of 5, but for me, it got me thinking. And the Shin-chan game, for quick reference, is like the Boku no Natsuyasumi games, like they're my childhood summer or whatever, and they're kind of like collectathon. Or the Shin-chan ones are kind of, you're a kid called Shin-chan and you go around this lovely sort of Japanese village and you collect insects and fish, and that's kind of it. And it's nice and pleasant. And I don't know, I just thought it was fine, but it got me thinking a lot more about sort of Japan and people moving out of the countryside and all this sort of stuff. I wrote about it in the review.
It's a fantastic review as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, that's flawed games have entered my game of the year sort of conversation, and I think that's this year to me.
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to say.
I think you've done a good job there of trying to describe that general feeling, because we've also done that on our roundup episode about 2024. I think all three of us were kind of like, but maybe not Rachel, because she plays so many things. I think she's had, a year that's as good as any, but me and Rebecca are a little bit like, haven't quite felt this year like most years, but we couldn't quite figure out why. So it's nice to hear that also from someone in the industry. It's sort of feeling the same. Yeah, that review for the Shin-chan game is really good. Considering the Shin-chan is just like as a concept, as like a mythical being, sort of confuses me, because that game looked beautiful, but my entire understanding of Shin-chan is just a little boy who always has his arse out.
That's it.
So I would love to have a little chat about your early life, Ed. So can you remember what your earliest memories were of video games? Can you remember which games made you fall in love with the medium in general?
Yeah, I think, at least from off the top of my head, I remember it was on my parents' home PC, and I used to play games sort of plucked from those bargain bins at, like, not department stores, but just like, I don't know what you call them. Big stores, like a Clark's Village or something.
Were these like the re-releases, like the sold out software kind of thing?
Yeah, that's it. The sold out software stuff in those like really thin cardboard sleeves. And I used to love Screamer. I used to love like MotoGP. Screamer was a sort of an arcadey driving rally type game. And I used to love that. I still think the courses in that are sublime. And now these kind of releases of old school rally games don't quite capture what they were really like back in the day. Sort of the colourful, almost like stereotypical, or sort of stereotypes of like certain countries. It sounds terrible, but you'd have like an Egyptian like course with like the pyramids in the background would be all obviously sandy, but they were like so colourful and playful, and you don't get that anymore really, or they sort of focus so hard on the driving. It was a lot of racing games, weirdly for me. The Need for Speed demo I used to play a lot, so it was the one with like police cars would chase me. I don't know which Need for Speed it was, but it was Hot Pursuit.
Oh, maybe?
It may have been like Hot Pursuit, but it was like a really old one. I used to love that too. Terrible at it. Again, just sort of driving around quite an interesting course. I can remember there being like a little curve around like a mountain bit, and it was just so like interesting to evade the police.
Yeah.
It was quite scary. I think I was quite young. I used to enjoy that sort of chase. And then I graduated to the Game Boy. Had a green Game Boy Color.
Nice. Same, actually.
Did you?
I did.
Yeah, there you go. And I think my first game, at least the one I can remember, was Super Mario Bros. The original.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was my first introduction to platformers. I think absolutely loved it. And then later, when I sort of got into secondary school, it was RuneScape.
Oh, I don't think I knew this about you. You're a big RuneScape sicko, were you?
Yeah, a big RuneScape runehead. Yeah, it was in year 7. Pretty much, we all joined this class. We were all getting to know each other. We were all part of the same form, and for whatever reason, I guess RuneScape was the big thing at that time, and a bunch of us made really like long-lasting friendships and sort of all formed a bond. A lot of the guys just started to play RuneScape, so we'd like log on together and chop wood. You literally just click on a tree and you just watch your character auto hit a tree for like hours on end. And you'd stand in banks and write like selling lobbies for 15k or something, and you become like this economic powerhouse. And it was just the best time, actually. I look back on it really fondly. And that was my first introduction to MMOs, and sort of begging mum and dad to pay this like £3 subscription to unlock the new classes like farming and the new part of the world. Yeah, I love that. Other memories, the GameCube, being at my granddad's house in Japan. And I can remember sitting on like a tatami floor, cross-legged, kind of like at this big VCR screen or whatever you call it, and playing like Mario Kart Double Dash and loving that. Rinsing the hell out of that, playing Smash Bros with my sort of Japanese friends that I couldn't speak Japanese at the time. He couldn't speak English, but we kind of communicate by just smacking the shit out of each other as like Shulk and Luigi or whatever, and playing Mario Party with a Japanese family, just as a way to get to know each other. And just have fun, and you didn't need, just sort of broke the language barrier in the sense you're all just being a menace to one another. And then it was playing GTA at your mate's house because you weren't allowed GTA.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a core memory shared by everyone of our age, I think, isn't it? Of, whichever other 13-year-old's parents were more lax than yours and didn't really understand what Vice City was.
Yeah, I was San Andreas, I remember really vividly. Just what a brilliant time, just driving around and running people over, and it just being like this awful thing that you were doing, but it was like the best thing ever at that age. Oh. And one final thing, one sort of core memory that I remember is playing Japanese. It was like a Mario and Luigi RPG. I think it was on the Game Boy SP, but it was entirely in Japanese. And I just didn't know what I was doing, but I made it quite far in.
Really?
But got locked by... Obviously, I had no idea what was happening. But it was quite an interesting way to play a game in just having to kind of go off like cues, I suppose.
That's what I'm assuming that's Superstar Saga on the GBA. That is wild that you played that in a language at the time you didn't understand and got. It just really goes to show how little kids have to do, how much time they have, that you were like, yeah, I'll stick with this.
Yeah, I don't know why. It was just so it was so frustrating. I don't even know if I had fun really. But yeah, I think I've had quite like a broad like history actually in games.
I think so. A bit more Nintendo focused than I thought actually. The thought of you sat there playing Double Dash and that Japanese copy of Mario and Luigi, and sort of just the humongous spectre of Marcus Phoenix just moving slowly towards young Ed, about to change his life forever with the dawn of the Xbox 360. But yeah, I think in my head, you're like, oh yeah, I've played Gears of War and Yakuza and these games and Call of Duty, and these games have shaped me. But it's really interesting to hear more about those earlier things that you've played.
It is weird that I have quite a wholesome like past, like a really young wholesome past in video games, and then I think it all goes horribly downhill once the 360 comes along.
Oh yeah, I did for all of us though, right?
Yeah, and like Xbox Live is a thing for the first time. I remember like vividly like putting on that like sort of grey headset and sort of saying hello down the mic. It was on Rainbow Six Vegas, was my first ever online shooter, and playing with someone, and eventually made a friend that I still keep in contact with, and we met in real life off the back of it, which is crazy.
It's wild.
But yeah, those are sort of the golden years, I think, in Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, and Gears, and BioShock, and Halo 3. Just ridiculous catalogue of games arrived at school.
I feel like those games definitely had an effect on you, knowing you as your friend, and also knowing the types of games you gravitate towards today. So it'd be great to maybe touch on that a little bit later. But I'd love to know, did you have any kind of relationship with games media when you were that age?
I think not maybe a huge amount, but I remember, I think maybe the first games magazine I bought was Games Master.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember what was in it or the issue or anything like that, I'm afraid, but it must be good. And then I used to buy like the Xbox magazine. I used to buy, I think, maybe the PlayStation one sometimes. But again, it's strange because I sort of described that I was kind of a Nintendo person, all this sort of stuff. But then I really liked PC Gamer and it really enjoyed the writing in that. Particularly liked the people. I think they've moved on now. They clearly have. I know they have. I liked Andy Kelly's writing style a lot and others that I can't recall. I'm sorry. But yeah, I used to buy them a lot. But I wasn't ever really, I think, like a huge consumer. You know, I never really read Edge. I may have bought one or two copies. I think I was subscribed to PC Gamer at one point, but then kind of stopped at another and didn't really read. Sounds awful, doesn't it? I didn't really read a huge amount online either. I just, here and there, I think. I just read some words on paper.
So what led you into games media then? What's the thread that leads from, because I know you went to university, so from uni to when you start Metabomb in 2017, what's the steps you took between then and there?
So, I went to uni and so it was a 3-year course. And I remember the 2 years didn't really, I mean, who was thinking about you're just at uni and you're not really doing much. And I didn't think much about my future. And then in my 3rd year, I still don't think I was thinking a huge amount about my future. But I remember for some reason downloading, this is going to sound very cliche, but downloading Dark Souls, the Prepare to Die edition on Steam, playing that, having spent probably 20,000 hours in League of Legends with my university housemates prior to that, and Counter-Strike and all these other competitive group games. But playing Dark Souls for some reason, not knowing anything about it really, and being like, oh my God, like this is making me think differently about a video game. I'm having to approach it differently. I'm thinking about it in my spare time, but I'm not thinking about climbing out of silver into gold and the best hero. I'm thinking about like, where's the next bit of the map and it's interesting how it's intertwining a bit. And it's just, in a way, like this game is a prick. Like it's just not giving me the signals that I expect from video games like Call of Duty and Gears, all these things I played. Mario Kart Double Dash. And
it's the Dark Souls of GameCube racing game.
And for whatever reason, I think I thought about it so much. It sounds so cheesy now, but I was like, I would quite like to write something. I'd always had like a latent interest in like writing, like creative writing. I sort of always did all right at school in like English class and quite enjoyed whenever they used to give us, probably the only person to sort of enjoy the homework. They're like, write a story and present it to the class, all that sort of thing. And took to those. And I think I was like, well, I can try and combine the two, like write about Dark Souls. So I started, I don't remember how, but I must have applied to write for a site that's still going and doing well, I think, and hope. It's called GameSpew, which is a funny name to say out loud. But they were looking at, I think they'd literally just started at the time and were looking for like voluntary writers. And I was like, oh, right, well, I'll write for you. And I started to do that. Not that I think nowadays I don't think I would advise people to write for free, but at that time I think I didn't really care. I was like, well, I'm at university, and the context surrounding that was I'm just happy to write about this game, So that's it. And then I left uni and sort of did a master's in publishing and was like, this is what I want to, maybe this is the career path for me, is to go into publishing, like book publishing, which is a very privileged position to be in, doing a master's and all this sort of stuff. And I understand that. And I I sort of look back at it like, for God's sake, Ed, but I used to spend a lot of my time in the evenings playing Overwatch, and Overwatch had come out at that time. And what I really should have been doing, I was quite social, but also I wasn't, because I used to spend a lot of my evenings up until like 2 or 3 a.m. just grinding ranked and Overwatch. And I promise this leads into something, but I remember leaving uni, leaving the degree, having done it, whatever, worked at HMV part-time, was like, God, I need to get a job here. Saw the advert for Metabomb pop up on Indeed, the job site, having searched for ages, applied for it. It was for a guides writer role to primarily write about Overwatch. And I was like, right, well, I've played the absolute shit out of that game for like a year. I think I still think about it. I think my crowning achievement in games this day is reaching Master in Overwatch.
And that is wild. Yeah.
I played it so much. And that is my greatest achievement. And I was like, right, well, here we go. Like, this is it. The perfect kind of like confluence. Is that too big a word? I don't even know how it works. But of writing, of having played this game that I know I'm quite good at. And here we go. And got the job in the end. And that's how I got in, basically. Moved to Brighton, which is where the office was at the time and the job was, and that's how I started.
Did you, when you started as a guides writer, did you think, was the goal to move into, you became a staff writer when you moved to RPS, was that the goal, or were you just happy to be in the industry at the time?
I think at the time I was just happy to have entered it. I wasn't really thinking too much about the future. I'm sort of one of those people, I think, I don't really think too long term. I'm always just happy to be here and there. And sort of brushing shoulders with kind of like, well, I suppose I'd sort of been a reader of games media and stuff, but I don't think I quite realised like the calibre of some of the people that I was brushing shoulders with when I first entered that office. Sounds terrible, but I used to sit, along, there was a whole Eurogamer team. It was all like a really lovely atmosphere on sort of this one floor, and it was like sort of Eurogamer had been growing at the time, and I don't know, it was just really cool. So having Donlan and Chris Bratt there and Chris Tapsell and all these people, and everyone was really friendly, and I hadn't really thought about, I'd love to join them or I'd love to join other sites. I was just like, this is cool. I'm happy. I'm just get to write about games and a game that I like to play. Yeah.
On another podcast I listened to a few years ago, you were name dropped. I can't remember the podcast, but someone name dropped you as sort of like the guy who realised that there was views in making content about Fortnite. Is that true? Are the allegations true?
I would say that I think that was on Chris Bratt's podcast.
I think it was.
I wish I could remember the name. I'm sure it's a very good. It's the People Make Games podcast, and it was Hiran Cryer who
it was Hiran. You're right.
Used to write for US Gamer at the time. When I was there, we started at the same time, and we're still, and he freelanced for Games Radar for a long time, and many other sites, and done all sorts. And we're still, really good mates today. A great writer too, and he.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think he name dropped me in that because he was talking about guides, like a guides focused thing, and said that I was the guy who kind of realised that Fortnite was the next big thing. And I don't know if I take all that credit. I think I'd have to credit John Bedford, and he was the one of the people who hired me. He was the person who had set up the site Metabomb and, essentially shaped early Ed, taught me how to write guides properly, how to do SEO, the search engine optimization stuff that helps you rank in Google, and how to perhaps not be curious, that comes later in kind of the features land, but how to be curious when you're playing games with a guide's focus, like what can I make a guide out of as I'm playing Overwatch? What are people wanting? How do I make my aim better? All this sort of stuff, and how to structure guides and what trends to chase. And so me and him, because we were the smallest site on the network at the time, this network of Eurogamer and VG 24/7, and later Rock Paper Shotgun would get acquired, and all these big hitters, and we were just two guys running this esports site, and we were like, we need to try and find other traffic sources because Hearthstone was the big thing, and it was John's. He was brilliant at that, but I wasn't, and I was the Overwatch guy, and we tried all sorts. We dabble in stuff that we thought might take off, and we identified Fortnite as it seemed to be doing well with streamers. And I used to watch at the time a lot of Twitch, followed a lot of the big streamers, and noticed that, hey, they're playing Fortnite a lot, guys. This is kind of big. And John realized it too. He was like, oh, this is getting quite big. And I think we just sort of thought, right, well, let's just start it. Because I think at the time, Fortnite, well, it started, didn't it, as like a weird offshoot of that like zombie survival game that it originally was.
Yeah. It came out as like a Minecrafty kind of thing, flopped, and then they saw PUBG and were just able to spin out the Battle Royale really fast, didn't they? I think was the story at the time.
That's it. Yeah, that was it. It was that I remember sitting next to Hiran and everyone else, and PUBG was the thing. It was a big thing. And then later on, other games would jump on that bandwagon, and it happened to be Fortnite, and we started to cover it. It started to do really big traffic. I remember vividly, we did a guide on how to get all the birthday cakes in Fortnite. and it for the first time, I remember looking at Google Analytics and just seeing the numbers just going absolutely bonkers. And there used to be like a TV screen in the office which would show all of like the top trafficking articles of the day, like a live stats thing. And for the first time, we were at the top by an absolute country mile. And we would do that over the course of, I don't know, however many weeks. It's not something crazy, but for a 2-man site, everyone else could see that we'd kind of cracked a formula here, cracked the code, and everyone else started to realize, not saying that they noticed we were doing it, but certainly I think everyone else started to realize, like, hey, oh shit, like Fortnite is big, guys.
Yeah.
So it's not just me, it was John too, and I credit a lot of my early development to John. I still keep in contact with him a bit. Brilliant sort of writer. I think one of those that perhaps quite understated in that, he was never kind of, it's going to sound not terrible, I want to sort of word this in the right way, but just, I think some people are huge presences on sort of social media and always kind of like big themselves up and publish their work and all that, and that's great, but I think John was one of those people who just like cracked on. He just did good work and did really hard work. These deck guides, he really sort of poured his heart and soul into that site and was very quick. I've never seen a person write a guide or any form of content as fast as he could, so accurately and so quickly. It was like frightening, and it was just, I just thought it was brilliant. And I know he sort of does a lot of freelance consulting and all this sort of stuff now. He sort of left that game.
So in 2020, you then make the jump to Rock Paper Shotgun as a staff writer. How did your day-to-day change then? So you go from being a guides writer, you're writing about Fortnite birthday cakes, and you were the father of modern SEO as far as I'm concerned now based on that story. How was that transition, and how was it to go from making guides to writing features and doing everything that a staff writer does?
It was really jarring. I'm not going to lie to you. It was very difficult. It was kind of a switch that I wasn't expecting. I think it happened because we'd been acquired by a company, and there were a round of redundancies and all this sort of stuff, and it kind of shook up our company, and it was like, oh my goodness. I kind of got saved by RPS in that respect, and I was actually put on guides initially. I was sort of doing some guides, and then I don't know who to credit here, but perhaps like Graham or Alice or John T, I don't know who, were like, hey, maybe we could try and get Ed doing some features, because I'd done some for Eurogamer, and it was Chris Donlan who overheard me get really excited about PsyOps, the Mindgate conspiracy on a rainy Wednesday morning or something, and he was like, hey, do you want to write about that? And I was like, oh, I'd never written a feature in my life aside from a voluntary thing, nothing paid or scary like that. And perhaps someone had seen those and thought, oh, maybe Ed could give it a crack. And it was really hard. And Alice Bell took me under her wing. And I remember the first article I did was about Black Myth Wukong's art. They'd released some art at the time of like some of the characters, like the rats or something.
Oh, okay.
And my task was to just write a fun little feature, 400, 500 words about what I thought about them. Mm. And I was like, that's very different to how do I make the most money in a Counter-Strike round or something, you know, like they're very formulaic guides. At least at that time, I could largely rattle them off quite quickly. You follow a set formula. And whereas this time was like, oh, right, well, I've got to kind of make this, I've got to inject my own personality into this. I can't follow a formula. I don't know what that is. How do I start? How do I do an intro that isn't just like, welcome to this guide and all these SEO terms that you kind of just have to shoehorn into a set piece. I don't know. I just remember being really sort of lost. I didn't really know how to structure things. And Alice Bell was so sort of understanding and so patient and was really, really good and it still is at providing like constructive feedback and really helped me kind of grow in that respect. And a large part of it was confidence. It was always confidence. Not always confidence, but a large part of it with me was confidence in sort of embracing like my voice. Because I think I'd sort of sit down and get my, fingers on the keyboard and I'd sort of start questioning everything, every sentence. Yeah. It would take me ages to perfect sentences. I remember those early things for Eurogamer I wrote, those first features, I would spend hours and hours and hours on just like a single paragraph because I just wanted to get a single word like perfect and then eventually it was just about loosening up and being a bit more confident in your voice, and the best pieces kind of come from being relaxed. And yeah, I think it was difficult until I started to loosen up and Alice sort of put more and more kind of gave me more opportunities to write maybe longer things, different things. I started to do news and just had these like really brilliant writers who would just help me out. Like Alice O was the news editor at the time and had sort of a very, she won't mind me saying this, like a strict way of editing. I look back on it and thought, God, it was difficult. I find news still difficult. Having to follow like a set structure, but it's so different from guides. Yeah. You kind of have to lay out information in a certain way, but still kind of make it engaging and bring your own personal juice to it. But she really helped on that front.
She was amazing at writing news from her point of view, like from her tone of voice.
Yes, yeah, she would kind of bring her own sort of perspective on things. She would write kind of like whatever the news was, but then she would always say like inject that. What's your opinion on it? And I think I took a lot away from her editing, from Alice Bell editing my stuff, and all these other people that helped me along the way. Really started to enjoy it. I think I was always so nervous going to work. A lot of that early period, I was so nervous and afraid of how slow I was at writing and how everything was hard.
Do you think that just changes with time? Do you think the longer you've been doing this, you find it's gotten easier? Or do you still have days where you stare at that blank page and think, what the fuck do I do here?
Only with Skull and Bones. I think it does get easier. I think it just does. You just gain more experience. I think now I still find news quite difficult. I find titles incredibly hard. There are some things that just I don't think come naturally. But I can kind of rattle off a news piece to a certain extent. Nowhere near as good as some other people like Edwin on our site and Nick and Brandy or whatever. But I can largely rattle one off now, and I wouldn't have dreamed of being able to do that before. And reviews, I can kind of just sit down and crack on. It doesn't take me too long anymore just to get the intro going, and I don't sort of faff around too much. I can kind of write it from start to finish in like a day or so if I really wanted to. And features can kind of come to me a bit, or ideas can kind of sort of flow into my brain a bit easier, and I can kind of pick things out, an angle. And that just comes with time and experience and having the right people explain to you how to sort of use your mind manage your mind, use your mind, unlock certain aspects of your thinking. Sounds very weird, but I think being curious about stuff and playing games and being aware of your thoughts, that was always a thing between me and Alice Bell that she taught me, was being aware of my own thoughts. And I would always say, I think this is a terrible idea in a meeting, and she'd be like, no, that's all right, just write about that thing that you've said, it's fine.
Do you have any examples of that? Because I think you're touching on something that was instilled in all of us in the site, and it's something that I've definitely carried on. But when you say be curious, can you think of how you'd apply that, sort of how that comes to be?
This may not be like the best example, but when I was playing Skull and Bones, a game that the easy angle, I have to come up with these supporter post articles just about stuff. You just have to kind of come up with them week by week, and that can be really hard. Like sometimes you're just not playing games, or you kind of have run out of ideas and all this sort of thing. And that has really taught me to be curious. And one of them was, we'd played Lethal Company. I think it was like me, you, Rachel, Rebecca. I think it was like and
yes, it was,
and Hayden. And I thought, right, can I use this as ammunition for a supporter post? I was like, well, I need to try and come up with an idea here that is not just, I played Lethal Company with some friends and had a great time and it was kind of scary. And I was like, right, well, what do I do in Lethal Company? What is it that we're doing? And I thought it was kind of funny that we were picking up like objects like fish and kettles and these strange objects you kind of have to bring, this loot back from these ventures. And recently at that time, I'd acquired in real life a coffee grinder that I use every day, a hand one. And I put beans in the top and I grind them every day, and it's great. I feel slightly wanky doing it, but it's great. And I'd never owned one before. And I was like, well, can I sort of merge the two together, my coffee grinder and what I'm doing in Lethal Company? And eventually kind of came up with the angle of like, well, Lethal Company is a celebration of of mundane objects, because it sort of is. Like you're kind of like hoarding those things as treasure, these like kind of just normal things. I think that's kind of an example of it. And I just got to write about essentially as an excuse to write about my fun coffee grinder for a bit.
It's something you're remarkably good at, and it's something I've always admired about you, is your ability to see the aspects of games that are right in front of most people's faces and then link them to something from your own life. I mean, I say this to you a lot, but you did a piece about grey carpet that was just stunning. You went to look at carpets, I think, in a shop, right? And you used that to talk about a game. And the most infamous one that I think all of us on staff used to talk about all the time was Gears of War and badminton, right? You did this piece about these two things that you absolutely loved. And I do think, it's instilled in us within the site, but you in particular really got that of, when people used to say, especially Alice used to say, well, be curious. And it does change the way you think about things. You play these games and you think, okay, well, like I was playing Path of Exile 2 last night, and there's still a part of me, even though it's been a year since I've been there, where I was looking at how nice the mud was. And it was,
that's an angle that you would, that's the thing. Yeah. Like, and I or you might go into a meeting, say, if you were still working there, and you might think, well, is this a good idea? Maybe a previous version of me may not have noticed that I'd had that thought, that I liked the mud, but I might bring it up in a meeting because I need something to say. And I might say, well, I kind of like the mud. I think it's a rubbish idea, but I played Path of Exile last night and I kind of like the mud. Like, is that anything? I'm probably not. And then, that's an example. It's a perfect example of someone like Alice or Graham or whoever saying, like, write about the mud. Write 500 words about what you thought about the mud. And you can link that to how the mud reacts when you roll to dodge, and what that might mean to you. Did you play rugby in the past and slide into some mud? Then you could just, make it interesting. Always bring in kind of personal experience, I think, is always so important.
I think this might lead quite nicely to my next question, which is about reviews. And I would love to know what you think makes a good review, but also what makes a good reviewer. I know those are two questions, so feel free to answer them in your own way.
This is really hard, but I think, because I was thinking a lot about this, like driving back from a friend's last night, I was just talking to myself like a maniac about what makes a good review, and
I love that. Yes, yes.
I don't think I really came to any like bombshell, like, eye-opening conclusion. I'll try and sort of talk about it from me. I'm a reader of a review and what I'd want from that review. And if I was to read a review, I would want to know, I think at a most basic level, how does it play? What does it feel like to play? But I think most importantly, how did it make the reviewer feel when they played it? I want to know what you felt when you played it. And then I can kind of relate to you as a reviewer. I kind of I sort of see through your eyes. I want to know how it felt in your hands and your opinion on the sounds and the weight of the guns. I don't need to know everything in a review. I think that's what makes a good review. Sorry, I'm sort of rambling now, but I think that's what makes a good review. It doesn't need to touch on everything. It doesn't need these, there's some reviews where there's just sort of bullet points on sounds nice, unlocking is good, the progression is great, the mechanics are good, the systems, these kind of words that don't really mean anything. Like, tell me what they mean. What is the mechanic that you're describing? Is it like a roll? We can start with that. How do you roll? How does the roll make you feel? Does it become easier with muscle memory? Does it help you beat certain bosses? And I don't know. It's all about kind of, sounds a bit cliche, but feel. But in a way that is fun and engaging and almost doesn't serve the writer. You kind of want to strike this balance where you're writing from your perspective and sort of trying to describe how it made you feel. So I'm bouncing now between but we're the writer now. But you don't want to become too self-indulgent. I don't want to, as the reader, read a paragraph, a big intro on, I stepped into the wasteland and the sun was bouncing off my skull, and it kind of needs to get to the point,
Yeah.
We need to. So it's just striking like a balance of you're telling someone. And again, we talk about this in the industry a lot about how would you describe that game that you've played to your mate down the pub? Fairly clear, fairly concise. How it made you feel. Was it fun? Just speak to me like a human being. Don't speak to me like about mechanics and these words that mean nothing. I think that's what makes a good review, and one that isn't also just like super long, something that just ends when it needs to end. It doesn't need to end in a way that is saying explicitly, I am wrapping up this review now. I have read your review the whole way through, and it's told me like a story, and it could just have touched on maybe a couple of elements that made you feel a certain way about the game, and then it can end, and I can go away from that thinking, oh, cool, I get a sense of that game now. Didn't maybe touch on every single aspect that I can maybe go and search elsewhere on other sites for that side, that more technical aspect. Yeah, I think it's really hard, but I think I've sort of tried to describe a little bit of what makes a good review.
I think you have. I mean, it's a difficult thing, I think, to review. It's something I always struggled with, but a lot of the things you've just said there are actually things that last time I wrote a review for you for RPS were line edits that you gave me back. Things about like, well, what does this mean? Explain this further. Like, I think it's so easy to fall into the shorthand of words like mechanics, like you say, but no, like what's the cool thing? And it does help you. It's that same thing about trying to find the little bits that you connect with more. If I said, oh, well, the loop in this is really compelling, what's the loop?
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? Okay, well, actually, it's actually this bit, and it's really cool because you get to do this bit, and then it you sort of unravel yourself the more that you think about those smaller bits, right? And I do think that's the difference between a lot of games criticism is whether you're just doing a bullet pointed list, like you say, of where the sound was nice, you replayability 7 out of 10, or I'm obsessed with this one parry mechanic, and I might just talk about that for 300 words. But then you really get the sense of what the writer liked about this. And if you connect with that, then you know that you'll probably like it too. Is my take on it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'll just sort of try and tie this nicely into like what makes a good reviewer. is someone, and I had to learn this, and I still think about this a lot, is being critical and not being mean. When you're playing a game that perhaps you're not getting on with, or that thing doesn't make you, it isn't great. It just isn't great.
Mm-hmm.
But why isn't it great? Just don't say it isn't great. Oh, it sucks, like it's rubbish. Like, well, why is it rubbish? And is there actually a part of that thing that you don't like that maybe has a slightly positive spin or is interesting to you? And try and examine other parts of the game or the experience that is, again, interesting. It doesn't need to be good, but has made you feel a certain type of way. And I think that's where the curiosity side comes back in. Like, it's easy to get sucked into like the negative spiral of being a bit mean, and that's a thing I think a lot of writers learn early on is to sort of try and steer away from that. We all get sucked into that side, and the hardest reviews are the ones where you kind of come away from something thinking it's a bit like, I'm neither excited nor sad about this game.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't even know how I still don't, to this day, I don't really know how, like, being a good reviewer, I think, is just about kind of accepting that and going, well, why, like, instead of thinking, writing, this is just average, this is a 6 out of 10. It's like, well, why? Just always say, like, why? What part of it is making you not engage with it in the way that you'd hoped? But also not getting too wrapped up in what the game isn't. That's another thing I had to learn, is not sort of talking about, like, I hoped that the game would have better heroes, better guns, a better system where you can walk, and instead of running or something weird like that. But that's not the game. Always try and talk about the game.
I like that. Yeah, it's good. I think that's a really good a good way of describing it, because I think it is more difficult than people realize. And I think it's hard sometimes for people to even know themselves as readers what is good and what is bad. And even then, when I'm saying that, do I mean bad? What's for them and what's not? And I think it really, I always encourage people to find the writers, not the sites. If you know someone, like me and you have incredibly similar tastes when it comes to especially AAA stuff. So I will go to your review, or we'll play Destiny and you'll tell me about it.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, I think you need to gravitate towards the people who share your likes and dislikes about certain things. And that is how you find good criticism. But no, I think, and that's a really good way of describing what makes a good review and a good reviewer. So while we're on the subject of that, is there a difference between reviewing an indie game and a AAA game, do you think?
I, again, was sort of thinking about this in the car, and I think with AAA games, they often come with a lot of context. They arrive on the scene as this, I don't know what the word for it is, but they're like, they've been talked about for a long time. I suppose, aside from the shadow drops or whatever, but even still, they kind of spring forth from a similar framework, if that makes sense. They kind of all share quite similar design. One thing that springs to mind is like a third-person game where they kind of shimmy through like a crack in the wall to load a bigger thing, a level. Just, there are a lot of similarities between the AAA games, and it's kind of, I think when you're reviewing them, it is advantageous, I think, to be in the know, to understand kind of how perhaps games of a similar ilk work or did things, so you can kind of comment on that. But also, I think AAA games arrive and they're already under more pressure than an indie game when I'm reviewing them. Not that I'm thinking, God, you've got to prove something to me here. I think there is also a slight element deep down somewhere where you're thinking, well, this is a huge operation here, a lot of rests on it, taken years to come out. Like, this franchise probably has an enormous history, and lots of people want to know how it's gone. Is it good? Is it worth your like £70, $80 now? And there's a lot of pressure there to deliver. And I think as you're playing it is always there in the back of your mind somewhere, subconsciously. But otherwise, I think I just view a AAA game like a game. I try not to get too caught up in and all of that. Having said all that, I try not to get too caught up in it. I just think, okay, is it doing good things? Is it doing bad things? How is it making me feel? The stuff we described. Actually, a good example, or I don't know if it's a good one, but a recent one for me, and I can talk about it because it's already out, but Marvel Rivals and Overwatch would probably be a very recent example of a review I'm working on at the moment, where Overwatch is Overwatch, Marvel Rivals at the moment, from what I've played very recently, is kind of like Overwatch, is very, very similar to Overwatch. And it's immediately under quite a lot of pressure. Like, what is it doing differently to Overwatch? Otherwise, I'm literally going to think, well, don't know, I suppose it's free and that's good. Characters seem all right. I'm not really a Marvel head. But that's all my personal experience coming in. But I'm, perhaps I'm not a Marvel head, but can it make me one? I'm thinking, well, can it bring me into the fold here? What new things is it trying to do? I know it's got these destructible environments and stuff. Like, is that really adding value? Do I care? I think I was talking to you like earlier about even just the models of the characters. The Overwatch characters are a variety of shapes and sizes, and they're so recognizable, and they're sort of, some are easier to target than others, whereas a lot of Marvel Rivals to me at this moment, they all kind of they're all just kind of humans in skin tight suits. It's like, well, all right. So yeah, I don't know if that really explains anything, but that's kind of, I'm thinking about these two games in tandem. Whereas with indie games, they're not in the conscious for years before they arrive on this, the Sony state of play. Here's this enormous game. It's just like, oh, all right, here's Threshold just arrived.
Yeah.
I don't know. We just had to keep our eyes peeled. Kind of came out cool. It costs $8.49 on Steam right now. A fraction of the price of a AAA game, but arguably it's done a lot more for me than, I don't know, a AAA game this year. And how am I reviewing it? Admittedly that yes, maybe there is less pressure, but I'm sort of thinking less about other games that's similar. I'm just thinking, well, what is it trying to say? What is it trying to do? And often they are just more interesting and sort of are more experimental. And I think actually because they're a bit more concise than a AAA game that is often vast and has all these map markers and all this sort of stuff that you kind of feel like you have to touch on a little bit. With an indie game, it's so much easier just to kind of zero in on a more fun. It's easier to write about the fun, interesting things, that the one or two or big, I'm going to say it, big mechanics that is focused on, if that makes sense. Like Threshold does not have an enormous map. It hasn't got a battle pass. Please don't release one.
Captain America is in it, though. That's the problem.
No, Winston's in it from Overwatch.
Winston Overwatch.
But it's just like, it's with these indie games, they're easy to zero in on, like the one or two interesting, like weird things it's trying to do, and that means it's more fun to write about them. It brings out a more fun, interesting style. You've got to be a bit more almost experimental in the way they're experimental. You've got to try and find a way to not sell the game to your audience, but in a way for Threshold, it was like, well, I want people to know that this is a good video game, and how can I non-spoiler this and give people the setup and try and describe how it's so different. Why?
Do you think you do change the way you write about things, knowing that, you write about Marvel's Rivals, is that what it's called? Marvel Rivals, bloody hell. And 10 million people have already played it. But with Threshold, you knew, and based on how many Steam reviews it has, that not many people have. Do you find that you change the way you might talk about it because of that difference in... Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think I knew when writing up the Threshold review that obviously if it maybe wasn't so good, in all honesty, I don't think we would have covered it.
Interesting.
It wouldn't have been in the conversation. It would have felt, again, that's perhaps an element of, you don't want to be mean. Like, why would we cover this indie game this person has worked incredibly hard on, and we don't think it's like great? I don't want to shit on him. shit on their work. But yeah, I think with Threshold, like it was identifying this game and thinking, I need to bring this to people's attention. Like, this is great. This is, left an impact on me. And therefore I wrote the review because it was good, like it was positive, but I just had to word it in a way that didn't sort of just give away the entire game. I just tried to describe those early hours, how it made me, roped me in, really got me thinking and was like, right, please people read this,
So as reviews editor, I feel like we're touching this a little bit, but I'm curious. So there's a position that you started in October 2023, previously held by our very own Rachel Watts, who I used to pester all the time for review codes. Very fond memories of messaging her asking for a Sonic Frontiers code, which she likes to bring up a lot as well. So, I mean, you've done a fantastic job since you've started in this role, Ed. And as we've said before, RPS, it's known for covering indie games, I think, a bit more than other major outlets. That's what attracted me to RPS when I was looking for a job in the industry. But now that you're in the position to call the shots, as it were, on what gets reviewed and what doesn't, how do you balance that coverage between AAA and indie games? Is it like a conscious thing that you have to think about?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is an element of we need to cover the big games, and that keeps the lights on, and will kind of prioritize those big games. As sad as it sounds, that's just the reality of things. But I think there is RPS's sort of history in the indies and sort of shouting out the good indies and being rooted in that scene. And we try our hardest to make sure that, depending on the capacity of our team, which in sort of current circumstances isn't as good as it was back in the day, we try our best. Right now, we try our best to find that one or two games or per month or whatever we're playing and sort of rooting around Steam for, or other sites that shout them out. And that was a thing that Aliso was really good at, was finding those things, and we tried to take that on, really. Yeah, so I don't know if it's like this great spreadsheet operation of like, we got to hit these targets, and we're sort of getting the Matrix gif of us like rattling a keyboard and green lights flashing and stuff. It's just like, so we just want to keep them in the mix and make sure that they're also front and center sometimes too. It's not always going to be like GTA 6 splashed across the screen all the time. It's like, hey, Threshold gets just as much attention. And perhaps, we don't write about it. Again, with stuff like Elden Ring, you kind of need to spool lots of, this isn't really reviews anymore, but in a sense it still ties in, and that after the Elden Ring review, you still need to write features, you still need to kind of keep hitting those. And that's where the focus goes, because that's where the traffic is. And perhaps that the indies don't get quite that same attention, but we certainly try our best to keep them in the mix, and we'll look at all these release calendars and stuff and have meetings about them every month. And I don't really search. I'm not a huge strategy head, so those aren't the ones that I'm writing about. But I try and write about the ones that I really enjoy, which at the moment are these PSX style horror ones. But Nick and Brendy and other people on the team, may notice other things, and we kind of just collaborate a bit on that front too.
Yeah. You should play Crow Country, by the way. I know I've been telling you to do that this year.
Yeah, I do need to play that.
Get on Crow Country. I sort of know the answer to this because obviously I used to work there, but how do you find indies? Like, how do you keep, because there's just so much out there, right? Because I know we find it difficult on this podcast, right? And I mean, I make sausage rolls for a living now. Like, I've got all the time in the world to just focus on indies. But yeah, how do you keep abreast of what's coming out and what's on the horizon? Is it easy? Is it hard?
It is hard. It's just because the AAAs are always front and center in every like list, or the sites that, I don't know, they're just always there. They're always on the release calendars or whatever. And I think with indies, a lot of them just like aren't, and you need to actually go and kind of mine for them a little bit, or find sites. You helped set me up on that feeder thing. And you just got to try and almost find like your sources, and those sources sort of help mine a little bit for you and bring to your attention, those realms of like itch.io and Steam and other things that you just don't have, you simply do not have the time and the resources to do yourself, and you just wouldn't think to go down that weird category and that weird subcategory, or to sort of, you can't always cast your eye of these things, and these sites help you sort of notice like, oh, this is actually picking up traction, or it's very rare that we cover indies where it's just like, oh, we've clicked on some nice cover art and it's ended up being, this like mouth washing or something. But yeah, no, it is hard. Like, you just gotta try and click on new and trending and keep looking at all these different sources. Really, it is quite full on, I think.
It's tough, but I do think that RPS is still, I mean, I still get a lot of my recommendations and I find out about a lot from RPS. So I think he's still doing, great work over there. This sounds like a bit of a challenging question. It's not meant to be, but I think it might lead to an interesting conversation. Do you think games media still serves an important role when it comes to discoverability of indies?
I think it does. That's my gut feeling. I think without sites like us and other sites, people may not know about a lot of these games, or certainly just those types of games being written about with kind of the same resources. It kind of nurtures the scene, if that makes sense. Because if they're not written about at all, they do just remain those things that you kind of mine for, and are still brilliant, but they're not being shown like, hey, like this is worth your time, this is really good. And I think just them having the platform, and you get emails sometimes from these developers like saying like, hey, like thanks so much for shouting out our game. Clearly means a lot to them to be sort of platformed sometimes, and they may never have had that chance, that opportunity, because there's just so many others around. And I think it is important for us to be in the mix and to interact with those devs too, at shows and stuff like that, because they're often like the loveliest people. So yeah, I think it is important that we write about them, and we give them a platform for sure.
I completely agree. I just feels like that relationship between critics and creators. You're right about the word nurture. I think you nurture each other within that symbiotic relationship. You're saying you bring all that context into something as a writer. When you're in games media, you are literally paid to sit and to think and be curious, like you say. And then in turn, the creators learn what people like or people don't like, or what resonates with people, which is maybe more important than those other things. And then that helps them create new things. And you sort of just go through that cycle. And that's the great tragedy of the turnover of people in games media, is that you lose these thinkers, these people who are able to articulate themselves and learn and also teach. And it's, I think, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just 32 years old and I just don't understand why Zoomers don't listen to this podcast. But I do think it's a very difficult thing to do. And when people do it well, you notice. And that's the main reason why I wanted to get you on here, is just to pick your brain a little bit as someone who does this a lot and does it very well. It's just sort of like look inside the mind of Ed and just sort of probe what makes you tick.
Stir my sort of soupy brain with a spoon.
Yeah, give it a little stir. Oh, delicious. Well, on that note, on your soupy brain, I would love to move on to some hyperfixations.
Oh.
I'm so excited for these hyperfixations. As someone who talks to you quite a lot, and I sort of feel like the majority of our conversations are just us throwing hyperfixations at each other. I know you've got a handful. I want to hear about all of these. Please tell me about these hyperfixations that you have, Ed.
So the first one, and I'll keep this short because I don't want to spoil anything. It's just a film. It's a short film called Look Back, and it's based on the manga by Tatsuki Fujimoto, who is the creator of Chainsaw Man. To some people, that will mean quite a lot. To others, they'll just be like, what the heck is Chainsaw Man? It's a very strange, but it was a very popular manga, and it was a big anime at one point. I think it was last year. And this is kind of just like a 58 minute film. It's like just beautifully animated. I just don't want to say anything, but I will read this little bit of blurb that says it captures the highs and lows of pursuing artistic excellence. And that's kind of all I'll say. And I remember sort of leaving the cinema and just being emotionally distraught and damaged, but in like the best possible way. You know me. I love kind of just sobbing after a film, and this will sort of make you do that.
Sickosmeme.jpg, absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's just it's one of those films that it might end a bit abruptly or whatever, or you might not understand it, but you do a little bit of reading around it, and it kind of just becomes quite clear. I don't know. Brilliant. Please do go watch it. I think it's on Prime Video at the moment.
Yeah,
too, which helps. Yeah. The next one is Love Village.
What is this? Because you mentioned this to me earlier when we were talking, but what is Love Village, Ed? I'm going to Google this as you're telling me about it.
So Love Village is, well, this is the second season, but both seasons are on Netflix, and they both remain the same setup, where it's a Japanese reality TV show where I think it's 16 singles. They relocate to a house, and it's like a traditional Japanese home in the countryside that has laid dormant for a long time and is in tatters, essentially. And it's like eight guys, 8 girls, and they enter the house, and their job is to renovate the home.
Oh.
But it's also about them finding romance and love at the same time. And it's not the twist, but the spin on this isn't that they're not just 20 somethings. They're all like 30, 40 plus.
I love
some of them may have been married before, divorced, all this sort of stuff. They've all kind of lived to a certain extent some of their lives already. And so there's, I suppose, the main mechanic is that
say more about
that. Is that if one of the guys or the girls they think, right, this is the person for me, like I've spent some time with them and I think, right, I want to pursue this further, I've fallen in love with them, so to speak. There's this bell that lies just outside the house, and one of them, whoever wants to, they go ring that bell to indicate that, like, how do I describe this? That I'm kind of into this person and I want to leave with them. I want to leave the process.
Oh, right. Interesting.
And the next day, they kind of, those two will meet. One will kind of say, like, hey, like, I rung the bell for you and I want to have a future with you. And if that other person says yes, they leave together. It's lovely. And then some new contestants will arrive later and they kind of fill the void, they fill the gap. But if the person says, well, no, I'm not feeling it, Chief, then that person who's rung the bell kind of just leaves. And it's kind of, it's pretty brutal. It's like a bit of an awkward, and the other person kind of stays. But I don't know, it's just really, I have mixed feelings on the word wholesome, but I think it's just like a really wonderful, relaxing watch. And it's interesting. These are interesting people. They're not just like vacuous 6-pack ab people who don't really understand anything. Like, these are people who...
No idea what you're talking about there, by the way. No idea what you're referencing. Certainly not nothing that we've watched multiple times and spoken about.
I hate those shows. They've just got excellent backstories, and there's this. It's quite a popular thing in Japanese TV and reality TV where you're watching these people do their romance thing, renovate the house, but it'll sometimes cut sort of Gogglebox style to I think they're famous comedians or Japanese TV personalities. It's just Becky and another guy, I can't remember what his name is, and they'll kind of comment on the situation too. It's just a really nice dynamic, and everyone's just like mature, and I don't know, it's just it's a good show about romance.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah. And my mum, who's Japanese, is like really into it. It's like one of few shows that she's got into that is Japanese, if that makes sense. Like,
okay.
A lot of people were like, "Oh, Shogun, you gotta watch Shogun. It's so good." And I watched it and thought I was a bit boring actually. And then my mum watched it and was like, "Oh, it's a bit boring actually. I don't really, it's just not. It just doesn't. I don't know."
Yeah.
But she finds this as almost as a way to connect to. I don't know. It just feels very real.
Yeah.
So those are my two like TV recs. Actually, my other one is just more watching, but it's more rot related. Where I don't really understand where this has come from, but I absolutely love watching like fragrance reviews on YouTube now.
I love this. I love this so much.
I find there's a coffee YouTuber. He's called James Hoffman. And he like reviews coffee machines and talks about coffee, and they're like 40-minute long things. And you kind of, if you're really into coffee, brilliant. I like coffee, but I'm not that into it. So, and I found he is quite good background noise. He's like a white noise machine to work to. And I find, but they're not quite enough. They're not quite stimulating enough for me. So channels like School of Scent and sites like Fragrantica, and another guy called Hamza Saab, I think his name is. He's my favorite right now. He'll like very upbeat, bring out like a bottle of Versace Eros, and he'll be like, "This is my favorite fragrance right now." And he'll like break down the notes, a bit of citrus, bit creamy, bit of the patchouli in here. And he'll like really enthusiastically describe all the notes, what it reminds him of. And then he'll go actually out into the streets of like, I think it's New York. And he'll sort of like brandish like those white sticks that you spray the fragrance on. It'll be like, "Hey, like I'm a fragrance influencer. Like, would you mind like smelling this new men's fragrance and like just giving me an idea if do you like it or not?" And I find it just like the most fascinating thing in the world, and I can't really describe to you why. I just love I suppose like the bottle design and the fact that they all have these different like notes, and I don't know, it's this whole industry that I'm never ever going to afford. Like that these people have these crazy collections, and I'm not thinking of buying any of these things, these many hundreds of scents I've seen, but yeah, it's great.
But you have ended up buying a scent, right? This is how this sort of process ended, is you found the Edda's scent, is what I understand.
Yeah, it kind of started when I was, actually that is maybe where it started, was I was doing traveling for like work, and you spend time in airports, and I think I just had a long time. So you do the classic, you go to the duty free, and I just went on absolute like smell spree. I just went to all of the brands, tried absolutely everything. I was like, "Oh, this is quite fun actually." And then looked into it more and was like, "Oh, I've never really sort of owned my own fragrance. Like nothing, super like great. I think I've owned like one very cheap thing." I was like, "That's fine." It's like, "Hey, it'd be quite nice to treat myself now I'm sort of earning my own money. Like, let's buy something, let's treat myself to something. It'd be nice to sort of feel confident in a smell." So yeah, I just bought a nice fragrance. I've not opened it yet. It's a Christmas present to myself. Nice. So I'm going to open it at Christmas. I know exactly what it is, obviously. It's like a Tom Ford, which is quite fancy, and far more money than you should be spending on fragrances, really. But it's the Costa Azzurra one, which is meant to smell like a man with rippling abs stepping out of like the sea. But he's like, but the sea is like filled with lemons and like herbs.
Like a big Nando's ocean.
Yeah. And I hope that, if I spray it on myself, that I will smell of, herbs and abdominal muscles that I don't have, and slicked back salty hair.
Yeah, well, if the Lynx advert in the mid-2000s taught me anything, is that scents completely change who you are as a person and how attracted people are to you.
It's just like I'm genuinely obsessed with it. Right now I'm even looking at one on my other monitor, reviewing hyped fragrances you told me to buy next, and he's just going through a list of these things. I don't know what that is, but it's a brown bottle and it's long, and he's presenting it in like a little box, and he's holding it with both his hands as if it's like the most precious thing in the world.
I love it. Well, there's like a whole side to YouTube of influencers for things you would never consider. And this is what's been fascinating about your scent journey, is you've been telling me about this and these influencers. And Yoli watches a lot of like stationary influencers, and she sort of was one for a period of time, like 2 years ago. And you're sort of like, oh, this is kind of bizarre. Like, it's great and it's amazing, but when you see people, like you say there, like, oh, racing this, like, it's such like a clickbaity title, for want of a better term, but for them, like, they'll have all this knowledge, they'll have all this context, and I love seeing people be excited about things they care about. It's just one of the best things in life, I think. But when you find these kind of influencers, like, there'll be like hat influencers, gloves influencers, like these people who are able to talk eloquently about the differences between these things. Yeah, I did watch a couple of the scent videos. I think you sent me some, and I was fascinated. Just the description of trying to describe a smell over YouTube is fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Lots of use of the word creamy, which made me laugh. Just when you're talking there about scents, I went to see the comedian John Kearns maybe like a year ago, 2 years ago. He was on Taskmaster, and that's how Yoli and I found him. And he was touring in Newcastle. And we were sat at the very front, and he was picking on me throughout the entirety of his set. Like, he just kept calling on me no matter what he was saying. What's your favorite movie, Liam? Oh, he thought my name was Leon, which was very funny. And you're not going to correct a comedian, right? So I was like, yeah, I'm Leon for the next 2 hours. And he kept asking me stuff. And he was talking about scents at the time and about how much, you've got to buy these nice ones and how nice they smell. And he pointed at me again. He was like, Leon, what kind of scent do you have on right now? I went, oh, I don't know, maybe like something my sister bought me from Next about 5 years ago, I think, that I'm still working my way through. And he I've never disappointed someone before in my life more than John Kearns when I said I was wearing Next spray that I didn't know the name of. He just lost all faith in me as a human being. It was quite a bizarre event to just watch someone I'd paid money to see just dislike me about how I smelled.
Was he like, did he expect you to own some really fancy thing, I guess? I don't know. Is that kind of a given for most people now, that everyone should have a scent?
Maybe. I mean, maybe I'm just a smelly guy. Maybe I need to I can't really ask you if I am a smelly guy, because most of the time we've met each other has been at gaming events, and I just feel like the bar is...
It's absorbed by...
Smells too much like G Fuel in this room to smell your Biolium. But yeah, maybe John Kearns expects everyone to have a scent straight off the bat. But unfortunately, I didn't have that, and he couldn't cope. So next time you see, or whenever you see John Kearns, which I'm saying that's a certainty in everyone's life, he can ask you, and you can say, well, John, I'll tell you all about the scent profile of mine and how I smell right now.
That's the correct terminology as well, the scent profile.
Is that actually the correct terminology?
Impressed. Yeah, I'm fairly certain that's what they say all the time. They break it down into its parts. The dry down. My favorite thing. The dry down. Yeah, so that's different.
What's the dry down?
So that's after it's been sprayed on your skin and it just settles for a while, and the top notes disappear and it sort of dries down, literally dries down.
Oh.
And some of them don't have I think it seems to be the SEO term is beast mode performance, which I find really funny. So if you don't have that beast mode performance, it'll become what they call a skin scent. We have to get in really close to smell it on the dry down. Yeah. But if it's got beast mode performance, it could last up to 8 hours just wafting from your skin.
That's a long time.
It is.
Beast mode performance feels too gamery for scent YouTube. I want my NVIDIA graphics card to have a beast mode performance. I don't know if I want my, I don't know, Paco Rabanne aftershave to smell like that. That's, wow. I've loved this process of you talking about scents. It's been one of the greatest things that's happened to me this year. It's just you messaging me about beast mode performance. Well, on that note, that scent profile and that beast mode performance, we'll come to the end of the podcast. Ed, it has been such a pleasure to have you on and to hear about your history and your thoughts on games media and your job. Where can people find you if they want to read more of your words?
They can find me on rockpapershotgun.com. That's where I do most of my work, all of my work pretty much. I was going to say they can find me on like Twitter. I don't have that anymore. I'm not a social media person. So yeah, it's just RPS. That's where you can find me.
Good. I think that's the right answer to things like that, is you can't find me anywhere other than the place I choose to publicly post things.
Yes.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you to everyone for listening, and we will see you soon. Bye for now. Indie Venture is a video games podcast created, produced, hosted, and edited by Rachel Watts, Rebecca Jones, and me, Liam Richardson. For more information, including a list of every game we mentioned in this episode, make sure to check out our website, indieventurepodcast.co.uk. You can get in touch by sending your questions, comments, and feedback to contact@indieventurepodcast.co.uk. You can support the show by rating us 5 stars and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast provider of choice. Some of the games we talk about on the show may have been provided to us for free for review consideration. Our intro music and stings were composed for us by Ollie Newbury. Check the episode description to hear more of his excellent tunes. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks for another episode of Indie Venture. Bye for now.